Hello children, good wishes from Nirmala ma'am. Today we are going to see the first chapter of history. Our first chapter is the First War of Independence in 1857. The Great Revolt of 1857 is also known as the First War of Indian Independence. Children, by the year 1857, by this year, India had already completed 100 years of British rule. During this period, the Indians were unhappy and resented. There was a strong negative feeling among the Indians due to the foreign rule, as the British were oppressive. They were very harsh, and of course they were exploitative. They exploited us. Now, though it started as a mutiny of the sepoys, this war, though it started as a mutiny of sepoys, who are the sepoys? They are the Indian soldiers in the British Army. Though this started a mutiny at Meerut on 10th May 1857, the revolt engulfed the whole of North India and shook the very foundation of the British rule in India. The Sepoy Mutiny proved to be an inspiration for the future nationalist movement and was regarded as the first heroic effort on the large scale to oust the British. Okay, now let's understand the causes of the First War of Independence. Dear children, let's understand the political causes. Subsidiary alliances, doctrine of lapse, humiliation of the emperors, annexation of Awadh. All these are the political causes. Now let's understand one by one. What is subsidiary alliances? Dear children, you all know that the East India Company established itself in India as a trading company. But in the beginning of the 19th century, it was no longer satisfied with its profits. And now the company officials started openly interfering into the political and the internal matters of the Indian rulers. They introduced various methods among the Indians, and one of that was the subsidiary alliance. It was an agreement. What is subsidiary alliance? It was an agreement. They made an agreement with the Indians. So it was an agreement in which the British promised the Indian rulers from attacks by others. Nobody will attack you, we will protect you. So that was a promise from the British to the Indian rulers. In return, one side they promised the Indians that they would protect them by the attacks. In return, the Indian rulers gave away many powers to the hands of the Britishers. And hence, the terms of subsidiary treaties signed by Wellesley with the Indian rulers. Doctrine of lapse. Lord Dalhousie introduced the doctrine of lapse which implied that if an Indian ruler died without a natural heir, his kingdom would automatically lapse to the British. With this method of annexation, it led to the outright annexation of the states such as Satara, Sambalpur, Jhansi and Nagpur. He also refused the pension to Nana Sahib because he was the adopted son of Peshwa Baji Rao. And now let's see the humiliation of the emperor. See, by the middle of the 19th century, the Mughal emperor had lost all the power and remained as the emperor only by the name, only in the name. Now, Lord Dalhousie announced that the emperor and his heir would have no right to the ancestral palace. That is, we are talking about the Red Fort in Delhi. Later, already Lord Dalhousie announced about the ancestral palace, and now later Lord Canning went a step further when he announced that the successor of the last Mughal emperor, that is Bahadur Shah Zafar, would not be allowed to use the royal title of the king, or the emperor. Now with this, the people of India felt very bad. The people of India could not accept it because they considered Mughals as a great rulers. And now let's see the next point. In the year 1856, Lord Dalhousie annexed the kingdom of Awadh on the pretext of misrule. It's not going on properly. So Awadh was annexed on the grounds of misgovernment and deposition. Deposition means removing from the post, the rulers being removing. Okay. The state was exploited economically and the Nawabs were reduced to the position of completely dependency on the British. They have to fully depend on the Britishers. So this incident also was deeply hurt by the people of India. So this incident deeply hurt the sentiments of the people. So that was also one of the political causes. Now let's understand the socio-religious causes. Inhuman treatment of Indians. The British officials were often rude and arrogant and believed in their racial superiority over the Indians. Tampering with the social customs. The British openly interfered with the social and religious customs of the Indians. Even the government, ignoring the sentiments of the people, they passed a law abolishing infanticide and sati and legalizing the widow remarriage. Though these were progressive steps to reform Indian society, yes, it was a progressive steps, but the orthodox section of the people of India were not happy with the interference of the British. They felt, why the British has to interfere into the Indian matters? Now let's understand the propagation of Christianity. The British encouraged the Christians, missionaries from Europe, to spread Christianity in India and to translate Bible into Indian languages. These missionary activities increased the fear among the Indians that they thought that the aim of the Britishers was to convert the Indians into Christianity. Propagation of Western education. The spread of the English education created a class of Indians who were westernized in dress and habits. They started adopting the Western style. Even the study of the Islam and Hinduism was discouraged in the schools. So it also is one of the socio-religious causes. The introduction of the new technology such as railways and the telegraph was viewed with suspicion. The high caste and the lower caste Hindus had to travel side by side together in railway compartments. The high caste Hindus believed that the British deliberately introduced the railways to defy their caste and religion. Now let's understand the economic causes. The most important cause of the discontent of the Indian people lay in the economic exploitation of the country by the British. The British looked India as their colony. They considered India as their own colony. And all the resources of our country, that is India, all the resources of our country were to be used not for our own development, not for the development of our country, but for the benefits of the Britain. After the Industrial Revolution in India, the British wanted to use India as a producer of the raw material and as a market for the finished goods. They bought raw material from Indian peasants at low prices, impoverishing the Indian peasants. They sold British factory-made goods in Indian market at a very cheap rates. They ruined Indian industries and impoverished the Indian artisans and craftspeople who could not compete with such low prices. They also introduced the policy of one-way free trade. The other side, there was free entry of British goods in the Indian markets. Indian goods were subjected to heavy taxes on entry to Britain. And now, by the middle of the 19th century, exports of silk and cotton goods to England from India had practically stopped. Thousands of craftspeople and weavers lost their livelihood. Flourishing industrial towns. Another economic cause is the sale of the British goods. The imposition of heavy import duties on Indian textiles made the textile industries weak and unable to compete in the foreign market. Moreover, after the Industrial Revolution, the company began to purchase raw cotton and jute at cheap rates for the textile industries in Britain. These raw materials were manufactured into finished goods and sold in India at a very high prices. Thus, England made huge profits at the cost of Indians. Now, due to the revenue reforms of the British, Many old zamindars lost their rights on lands and were left without a source of income. They did not have any source of income. People who depended on them for employment, such as artisans, craftspeople, small peasants, all became unemployed. Now, the inhuman treatment. The British planters monopolized plantation industries such as indigo and tea. The peasants were forced to grow these crops only. The cruel treatment of the indigo cultivators by the European plantation owners was one of the most inhuman episodes in the history of India under the British rule. Thus, let's conclude that the economic exploitation by the British and the complete destruction of the traditional economic structure caused widespread resentment among all the sections of the people. The Indians had to face extreme poverty and famines ravaged the country. As many as 12 major natural calamities like famines occurred between 1770 and 1857, which took a huge toll on the lives of the people. Now let's understand the military causes. Low salary and poor prospects of promotion. The army of the East India Company in India consisted of two sections. One, in which all officers and soldiers were British, and the other in which the officers were British but the soldiers or the sepoys were Indian. In comparison to their British counterparts, the Indian sepoys were paid lower salaries and had no scope of promotions, as all the high posts were reserved for the British. Even they had to pay for their uniforms. Now, religious sentiments. In 1856, the General Enlistment Act was passed by the British Parliament. Now let's understand what this act was. According to this act, the Indian soldiers could be sent overseas for the military service, and no extra allowances were given for that. The Brahmin soldiers reacted strongly on this act because, according to the popular belief of India, crossing the seas would lead to the loss of caste. Next, the defective distribution of troops. The reorganization of the army of the East India Company in India, that is from 1796 onwards, led to a defective distribution of troops in the country. Important places like Delhi and Allahabad had no British armies. Moreover, the British were busy fighting wars in the foreign countries. This provided the Indian soldiers with a good opportunity to revolt. Next, racial discrimination. The British officers were proud of their race and achievements, and therefore ill-treated the Indian sepoys. This discrimination was clearly visible in terms of salaries and promotions. The Indian sepoys got lower salaries than the British counterparts, and all the avenues of promotions were closed.